Hi, welcome to this week's episode of In the Hoods. This week we're going to be talking about the New York City neighborhood called Chelsea. This is a neighborhood which runs on the west from the Hudson River to the east of 6th Avenue, or Avenue of the Americas, north to 29th or 30th Street, and south to 14th Street. This is a very much increased area from where it began. Like many neighborhoods in New York City, Chelsea began its life as a Dutch farm. And in the 1750, this farm was sold to a Major Clark from the British military. Major Clark kept the farm as it was and named it Chelsea after the neighborhood in London, hence the name Chelsea. The farm itself really only ran to 8th Avenue on the east and was between 24th Street and 21st Street. It was much, much smaller. Eventually, the farm was increased in size to go south to 19th Street. But the geography of Chelsea has increased quite a bit and from its origins. And I actually remember my idea of Chelsea was always beginning on 8th Avenue. But I'm in the minority here. The evolution of Chelsea, most of us know Chelsea to be an area that has a very high LGBTQ population. It also has fabulous restaurants. On 9th Avenue, you have art galleries. But over the years, it's housed a number of different types of people. During the industrialization of Manhattan, because part of it was along the Hudson River, warehouses were built along the Hudson River. And there were piers, and they needed people to work in these warehouses and piers. And the area became home to a very large Irish population. And housing was built for this population as the need increased. People showed up to build tenement housing. This created a much poorer working class population in Chelsea than had existed before. And to that end came the first settlement house, or one of the first settlement houses in Manhattan, called the Hudson Guild, which continues to this day. Another big change was when the Coopers, or the Clarks, gave their apple orchard to the Episcopal Church, allowing for land for the General Theological Seminary to be built. And this still exists today. It's a beautiful campus with lots of trees and green and brownstone buildings. It's truly lovely. And this is a real throwback to the early 1800s. During the 1800s, a lot of brick row houses were built in the area. And they were federal row houses. The area became very desirable to live in. Many families moved into the area. The whole area began to develop. In the early 1900s, some developers came in, and one of the buildings which still exists today, which stands out, is the London Terrace and Towers building, which runs from 8th Avenue on the east to 9th Avenue on the west, and 23rd Street on the south, and 24th Street on the north. And this building had a swimming pool built into it. It was luxury housing at the time. but it was all rental housing. And over the years, this too evolved. It came along with the general sell-off of rental housing during the 1980s. It was turned into the London Terrace Cooperative, which exists till today and has housed some very famous people. There are also the London Towers, which are the buildings right next door in the same complex, the same one-block area, which are still rental housing. But this is a huge, huge block. The area expanded over the years and I think moved east. There was a real theater district in the area along 23rd Street with a little bit of 14th Street as well in the 1800s. And to support that district, there were some hotels built a little further east. One of those is famous to this day, the Chelsea Hotel, which was a hotel in its early days and then was turned into apartment housing a little later when the theaters had moved north and there was no longer a need for a hotel. That didn't apparently work out too well, so it went back to being a hotel. And I remember it being a destination for many artists. It was a residence hotel. Many artists and also many rock and rollers. Mapplethorpe is famous for having lived there, Patti Smith, along with many other artists. Earlier in about, I think, 2012 to 15, the hotel was sold. And all this time, they have been trying to turn it into a condominium, but running into all sorts of historic preservation problems. So it continues to house some people as a residence hotel, and it is being worked on within strict parameters of historic preservation and will eventually probably become a condominium. But the area is so interesting and has so much history. 6th Avenue, which is now considered part of Chelsea, used to be lined with small buildings which housed a lot of photography studios. On the ground floor, you had sewing machine repair shops and sewing machine sales. And this was to support the garment district, which is just north of here. Many of these building owners sold out to developers in the 90s, and now the avenue is like a cavern. It is just lined with huge apartment buildings, all of them rental buildings. But they have adopted the moniker of Chelsea as well. So it's a huge neighborhood, very diverse, different kinds of populations, different things going on, but it has a huge history in New York City.